The desert wind howled across the barren expanse of Arizona territory, carrying with it the sting of sand and the promise of another scorching day. In the distance, where the red earth met the endless sky, smoke curled from the Apache encampment nestled against the rocky outcroppings. It was the summer of 1873, and the fragile peace between the native tribes and white settlers hung by a thread as thin as spider's silk. The Peterson Ranch sat like a defiant fist of civilization in the wilderness, its wooden structures weathered by years of sun and storm. Three sisters moved about the morning chores with practiced efficiency, their calloused hands speaking of lives carved from this unforgiving land. Ruth Peterson, the eldest at 24, hefted a water bucket with arms strengthened by years of labor. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, revealing a face that might have been beautiful if not for the permanent scowl etched between her brows. "Clara," she called sharply. "Those horses won't water themselves." Clara, 2 years younger, emerged from the barn with hay clinging to her practical brown dress, where Ruth burned hot with emotion. Clara moved through life with calculated coolness, her gray eyes missing nothing. "I'm aware. Ruth, unlike some, I can manage multiple tasks without announcing each one to the heavens." The youngest, Miriam, sat on the porch mending a torn bridle. At 19, she possessed a gentleness that seemed out of place in this harsh landscape. Her fingers worked the leather with delicate precision, but her green eyes held shadows that spoke of wounds deeper than any the desert could inflict. She rarely spoke these days, preferring the company of her thoughts to the sharp tongues of her sisters. "Both of you, quiet," Ruth commanded suddenly, shading her eyes against the morning sun. "Riders coming." The sisters gathered on the porch, hands instinctively moving toward the rifles propped against the wall. But as the dust cloud resolved into shapes, they recognized the worn hat of Samuel McKenna, the territorial marshal, accompanied by 2 deputies. "Morning, ladies." McKenna tipped his hat, though his weathered face remained grim. "Afraid I've got troubling news. 3 head of cattle found dead near Skeleton Ridge. Apache arrows." Ruth's jaw tightened. "And you're certain it was Apache, not bandits trying to stir up trouble?" "The arrows are genuine enough," McKenna replied. "Chief Naichi's band has been camping near your boundary for weeks now. With the drought hitting hard, game scarce, desperate men do desperate things." Clara stepped forward, her voice steady. "What do you expect us to do, Marshal? We've lost 6 head this month alone. Father would have—" "Your father's dead, Miss Clara," McKenna interrupted, not unkindly. "And his methods died with him. Last thing we need is more bloodshed." The mention of their father cast a shadow over the conversation. Thomas Peterson had been a hard man, quick with his fists and quicker with his gun. His death 2 winters past had left the ranch to his daughters, along with a legacy of bitter resentment from the Apache who claimed he'd murdered one of their warriors over a land dispute. "We'll post extra watches," Ruth declared. "And if they come for more cattle, you'll do nothing rash," McKenna warned. "The Army's already itching for an excuse to clear out every Apache in the territory. Don't give them one." After the marshal departed, the sisters returned to their work, but tension crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. As the sun climbed higher, Miriam ventured to the well near the eastern boundary, bucket in hand. The rope was frayed, the wood worn smooth by countless hands, but it was the closest water source to the house. She didn't hear them approach until it was too late. 3 Apache warriors materialized from the rocks like spirits, their faces painted with ochre and ash. Miriam's scream died in her throat as one grabbed her wrist, the bucket clattering to the ground. She recognized him, Naichi's son, though she didn't know his name. His eyes were dark as obsidian, unreadable. "You come," he said in broken English. "Chief wants Peterson daughters." Terror coursed through her veins, but before she could cry out again, she heard Ruth's voice, hard as iron. "Let her go!" Her sisters had appeared, rifles leveled. Clara's hands were steady, but Ruth's finger already rested on the trigger. The warriors seemed unconcerned by the weapons, as if they knew something the sisters didn't. 3 daughters come, or 20 warriors come, the leader said simply. Chief's words. Ruth's eyes darted to their ranch, calculating. 20 warriors would overwhelm them in minutes. What does he want? Justice, peace. You come. You see. It was Clara who lowered her rifle first. Ruth, we can't fight 20 men. Like hell we can't. They could have killed Miriam already. Clara interrupted. They didn't. That means something. After a tense moment, Ruth cursed and lowered her weapon. Fine, but if this is a trap, no trap, the warrior assured. Chief's word is sacred. The journey to the Apache camp took less than an hour, though it felt like days. The sisters rode their own horses, flanked by warriors who remained silent as shadows. Miriam kept her eyes downcast, her hands trembling on the reins. She could feel the weight of their gazes, particularly from the leader who had grabbed her at the well. The camp spread before them in organized chaos, wickiups arranged in family groups, cooking fires sending smoke into the crystal air, children peering out from behind their mothers' skirts. But it was the figure seated on a blanket before the largest dwelling that drew their attention. Chief Naichi was ancient by any standard, his face a map of wrinkles earned through decades of survival. Beside him sat a younger man, perhaps 25 summers, who kept his eyes fixed on the ground. Peterson daughters. The chief spoke in surprisingly clear English. You know why you are here? Ruth lifted her chin defiantly. Your men said something about justice and peace. We've taken no Apache lives. Your father took my brother's son, Naichi replied, his voice carrying the weight of old grief. Shot him for crossing land that was ours before white men drew their lines on paper. Our father is dead. Clara stated. His sins died with him. The chief studied them with eyes that had seen too much. Blood calls for blood. This is the old way. But I am tired of blood. My people are tired. He gestured to the silent man beside him. This is Taza, my sister's son. He is a good hunter, a brave warrior, but he carries much sadness. His woman was killed in a raid by white soldiers who mistook our peaceful camp for hostiles. Miriam found herself looking at Taza despite herself. Unlike the other warriors, he wore no paint, no fierce expression. His face was handsome in a stark way, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw, but his dark eyes held a depth of sorrow that called to something within her own wounded heart. I offer new way. Naichi continued, marriage between our peoples. Taza will take the Peterson daughters as wives, all 3, as is sometimes done when a man must provide for many. This will join our blood without spilling it. The pronouncement hit like a physical blow. Ruth jumped to her feet. You're insane. We're not chattel to be traded like horses. Sit, the chief commanded, and something in his tone made even Ruth obey. You misunderstand. This is not taking, this is joining. Taza will live by our laws. He cannot touch a woman who does not wish it. But you will stay in camp, learn our ways. Let our peoples see that Apache and white can be one family. For how long? Clara asked, ever practical even in her shock. Until the seasons show it is real, or until it fails and we return to the old ways of blood. The old chief's meaning was clear. Cooperate, or face the violence that would inevitably follow. 20 warriors against 3 women. The math was simple, brutal. This is barbaric, Ruth spat. Forced marriage? Your people forced daughters to marry for land, for gold, for alliance. Naichi observed. How is this different? At least here, Taza cannot force anything more than presence. Throughout the exchange, Taza had not spoken, had barely moved. But now he raised his head, and Miriam caught his gaze for one electric moment. What she saw there wasn't triumph or lust, but a resignation that matched her own. He was as much a prisoner of this arrangement as they were. You have until the sun touches the western peaks to decide, Naichi declared. Choose wisdom or choose war. The sisters were led to a small wickiup to discuss their fate. The space was cramped, smelling of smoke and tanned hides, but it offered privacy for their heated debate. We run, Ruth declared immediately. Take the horses and go where? Clara interrupted. You heard the marshal. The army wants an excuse to slaughter every Apache in the territory. If we run and they retaliate, how many deaths will be on our hands? So we just submit? Become that savage's wives? Ruth's voice dripped with disgust. Miriam finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't look savage. He looked sad. Both sisters turned to stare at her. Ruth's face flushed with anger. Of course you'd sympathize. You always were too soft for this land. Enough. Clara intervened. Fighting among ourselves solves nothing. We need to think clearly. The chief said Taza can't touch us without permission. That gives us power. Time to figure out an escape that doesn't end in massacre. And if there is no escape? Miriam asked quietly. Clara's gray eyes were steel. Then we survive, as we always have. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, the sisters emerged from the wickiup. The entire camp seemed to hold its breath as they approached Chief Naichi. Taza remained seated beside him, still as carved stone. Ruth spoke for them all, her voice carrying across the camp. We accept your terms, Chief Naichi, but know this, we are Peterson women. We do not break easily. The chief nodded solemnly. I would expect nothing less. He gestured to a structure at the edge of camp, not a traditional wickiup, but an abandoned barn from some long-forgotten homestead. You will stay there with Taza, close enough for all to see, far enough for privacy. The marriage begins at sunset. As the sisters were led to their strange prison, Miriam glanced back once. Taza was watching them now, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met across the distance, and she saw something flicker in his gaze. Not desire, but perhaps understanding. They were all prisoners here, bound by the chains of their people's hatred. The barn loomed before them, its weathered boards gap-toothed and gray. Inside, someone had spread blankets and left water, dried meat and flatbread. The space smelled of old hay and dust, with gaps in the walls letting in streams of fading sunlight. It was to be their wedding bower, their jail, their testing ground. As the sun touched the peaks, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold, Taza appeared in the doorway. He entered slowly, carefully, like a man approaching spooked horses. In his hands, he carried more blankets and a small bundle. I will sleep there, he said in careful English, pointing to a corner far from where the sisters had instinctively huddled. You are safe. Ruth laughed bitterly. Safe? We're prisoners forced into an unholy union with a man. Taza interrupted quietly. Who wants this no more than you? He set down his bundle and met each of their eyes in turn. But my people need peace. Your people need peace. So we will find a way. He turned his back to them then, arranging his blankets with methodical precision. The message was clear. He would give them what privacy he could in this impossible situation. As darkness fell over the desert, the four unlikely spouses settled into their corners of the barn. Outside, they could hear the camp settling for the night, mothers calling children, warriors laughing around fires, dogs barking at shadows. It was a strangely domestic sound that made their situation feel even more surreal. Miriam lay between her sisters, staring up at the gaps in the roof where stars were beginning to appear. In the corner, she could hear Taza's quiet breathing. So controlled it was clear he wasn't sleeping either. They were all awake, all aware, all waiting for something. Though what? None could say. The first night of their forced marriage passed in silence, but it was a silence pregnant with possibility. In the darkness of a barn that was neither Apache nor white, four souls began the delicate dance of survival that might, against all odds, become something more. The first light of dawn crept through the barn's gaps like an unwelcome visitor, illuminating motes of dust that danced in the stale air. Miriam woke with a start, momentarily disoriented before the weight of their situation crashed back. Her sisters still slept. Ruth curled defensively with her back to the room, Clara lying rigid even in slumber. In his corner, Taza sat cross-legged, already awake, his eyes fixed on something beyond the walls. The quiet scrape of movement drew his attention. Their eyes met across the dusty space, and Miriam felt heat rise to her cheeks. She looked away quickly, fumbling for the water jar. Her throat was parched, whether from the desert air or anxiety. She couldn't tell. "Drink slow," Taza said softly. His English careful but clear. "Desert takes water from body quick." She paused, jar halfway to her lips, surprised by the concern in his voice. "Thank you," she whispered, not wanting to wake her sisters. Ruth stirred at the exchange, instantly alert. She sat up, hay clinging to her dark hair, her eyes immediately hostile as they fixed on Taza. "Don't speak to her," she commanded, as if she had any authority in this strange arrangement. Taza merely inclined his head and returned his gaze to the wall. The dismissal seemed to infuriate Ruth more than argument would have. She stood abruptly, shaking Clara awake. "We need to establish rules," Ruth announced, brushing dust from her skirts with sharp movements. "Boundaries. You stay on your side, we stay on ours." Clara, ever practical even when barely awake, added, "And we need to know what's expected of us, this arrangement. What does your chief truly want?" Taza was quiet for so long that Miriam wondered if he would answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weariness that seemed too heavy for his years. "Chief wants peace, wants to show that Apache and White can live without killing." He paused, seeming to search for words. "He thinks if people see us together, not fighting, maybe they think different." "And you?" Clara pressed. "What do you want?" For the first time since entering the barn, something like emotion flickered across Taza's impassive features. "I want nothing," he said simply. "My wants died with—" He stopped abruptly, jaw tightening. An uncomfortable silence fell. Miriam found herself studying him despite her fear. In the morning light, she could see details she'd missed before. A scar along his jaw, the way his hands bore calluses from weapons and work, how his shoulders carried tension like a permanent burden. "We need food," Clara stated, breaking the moment. "And we need to understand the camp rules. If we're to be prisoners—" "Not prisoners," Taza interrupted. "Wives." Ruth laughed bitterly. "Wives don't get locked in barns. Apache wives stay where husband stays." Taza replied, "This barn is middle ground. Not wiki up, not White House, Chief's compromise." He stood in one fluid motion, causing all three sisters to tense, but he merely moved to the bundle he'd brought the night before, unwrapping it to reveal dried meat, cornmeal, and what looked like wild onions. "I show you to make Apache breakfast," he offered, addressing none of them in particular. "Or are you hungry instead? Your choice." It was Clara who moved first, practical needs overcoming pride. "Show me," she said simply. Miriam watched, fascinated despite herself, as Taza demonstrated how to mix cornmeal with water and form it into small cakes to cook on hot stones. His movements were efficient, practiced, and he explained each step in his careful English. Ruth stood apart, arms crossed, but Miriam noticed she was watching too. "In my village," Taza said as he worked, "women do this, men hunt, but here—" He gestured vaguely at their situation. "Here, everything different. Did your wife cook for you?" The question escaped before Miriam could stop it. Both her sisters shot her sharp looks, but she kept her eyes on Taza. His hand stilled for just a moment. "Yes," he said quietly. "She make best corn cakes, add pine nuts when we have them." He resumed his work, but the set of his shoulders had changed, become more guarded. They ate in awkward silence, the corn cakes surprisingly good despite the strange circumstances of their making. As the camp outside came alive with the sounds of daily life, a shadow fell across the barn's entrance. An Apache woman appeared, elderly but straight-backed, carrying a large water jar. She spoke rapidly in Apache to Taza, her eyes flickering over the sisters with obvious disapproval. Taza responded quietly, and something in his tone made the woman's expression soften slightly. "This is Juanita," he told them. "She brings water. Also?" He paused, seeming to search for delicate words. "She says you need Apache clothes." White women dress is no good for desert life. Ruth bristled immediately. We'll wear our own clothes. Thank you. Juanita didn't need translation to understand the refusal. She shrugged and set down the water jar. But before leaving, she spoke again to Taza, her tone urgent. What did she say? Clara demanded. Taza hesitated. She says soldiers were seen 2 days south. Army might come looking for you. Chief says if you wearing Apache clothes, soldiers maybe think twice before shooting. The implication hung heavy in the air. Dressed as Apache women. They might be safer from their own people, but also more permanently marked as belonging to this world they'd been forced into. Clever, Clara murmured, recognizing the strategy. Your chief thinks of everything. He is old, has seen much war, wants to see peace before he dies. Taza moved back to his corner, giving them space to consider. Clothes are there when you're ready, or not, your choice. The morning stretched into afternoon, the heat building until the barn felt like an oven. The sisters took turns walking the small space, testing the boundaries of their confinement. The barn door remained unguarded, but they could see warriors moving about the camp beyond, a subtle reminder that escape was impossible. It was during one of these restless circuits that Ruth made her move. Without warning, she lunged at Taza, clearly hoping to catch him off guard and perhaps steal whatever weapon he might carry. But Taza moved like water, flowing aside from her attack without rising from his seated position. Ruth stumbled, catching herself against the wall. Feel better? He asked mildly, as if she'd done nothing more threatening than swatted a fly. Ruth's face flushed with rage and humiliation. She raised her hand to strike him, but he simply caught her wrist, gently, but with strength that couldn't be denied. I not fight you, he said, looking directly into her eyes. Not ever. You want to hit, but I not fight Peterson women. He released her wrist and returned to his position, leaving Ruth standing there, shaking with fury and something else, perhaps confusion at this unexpected response. Why? Clara asked, genuinely curious. Most men would strike back. Taza considered the question. My woman, my wife, she, Apache, but taken by Mexicans as child, raised to serve. When I find her, bring her home. She afraid all the time, afraid of hands, afraid of anger. His voice dropped lower. I promise her. No fear in our wiki-up, ever. She dead now, but promise still lives. The barn fell silent except for the buzzing of flies and the distant sounds of camp life. Miriam found tears pricking her eyes, though she couldn't say exactly why. There was something in the way he spoke of his dead wife. Not just grief, but a tenderness that seemed at odds with everything she'd been taught about Apache warriors. As the afternoon heat reached its peak, making even breathing an effort, Taza rose and began doing something strange with the old blankets. He strung them across a section of the barn, creating a partition. For privacy, he explained, not looking at any of them directly. Apache way. Husband not look on wife unless invited. 3 wives need more privacy. It was such an unexpected consideration that even Ruth seemed momentarily speechless. Behind the blanket partition, they could change clothes or attend to personal needs without his eyes on them. It wasn't much, but in their circumstance, it felt like a significant kindness. As evening approached, bringing blessed coolness, they heard commotion outside. Taza tensed, listening, then relaxed slightly. Chief comes, he said. Sure enough, Naichi appeared in the doorway, accompanied by 2 warriors. His ancient eyes took in the scene, the partition, the careful distance between Taza and the women, the uneaten Apache clothing still bundled in the corner. He spoke at length in Apache, and Taza responded quietly. Then the chief turned to the sisters, switching to English. First day passes. No blood, no forcing. Good. His gaze lingered on each of them. But marriage is not just absence of war, is presence of... He seemed to search for the word. Joining, understanding. We understand plenty, Ruth said coldly. We're hostages to prevent bloodshed. Naichi smiled, an expression that transformed his weathered face. All marriage is hostage-taking. Peterson daughter. Man hostage to woman's happiness. Woman hostage to man's honor. Question is, what you do with your captivity. He spoke again to Taza, something that sounded like instructions, then departed with his escort. Taza looked uncomfortable. What did he say? Clara demanded. He says I must show affection, in sight of others, so they believe. Taza looked genuinely distressed by this command. I try not to make difficult. Show affection how? Ruth's voice was sharp with alarm. Sit together at evening fire, walk together, maybe touch hand. He looked miserable. I not want either. The idea of public display clearly disturbed him as much as it did them. Miriam found herself speaking before she thought. It's not your fault, she said softly. You're as trapped as we are. Taza looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them, a moment of mutual recognition. They were all victims here, all forced into roles they didn't choose. As darkness began to fall, Taza stood reluctantly. We go to fire now, eat with others, show, he gestured helplessly. Show that we're one big happy family. Clara finished dryly. Very well, but remember, touch more than a hand and Ruth will find a way to make you regret it. Promise or no promise. They emerged from the barn into the cooling evening air. The camp's central fire was already burning. Families gathered around it, conversations stilled as they appeared. All eyes turning to watch this strange procession. One Apache warrior and 3 white women. The impossible made real. Taza led them to a space that had clearly been left for them, gesturing for them to sit. The arrangement was awkward. How does one sit with 3 wives? In the end, he sat cross-legged with the sisters arranged in a semicircle beside him, close enough to appear connected, but not actually touching. Food was passed, roasted meat, some kind of root vegetable, and flat bread. Miriam noticed how Taza served them first, making sure each had enough before taking his own portion. It was a small gesture, but one that didn't go unnoticed by the watching Apache. An old woman across the fire said something that made several people laugh. Taza's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. What did she say? Miriam whispered. Nothing kind, was all he would say. As the meal progressed, the initial intense scrutiny faded into occasional glances. Children, bolder than adults, crept closer to stare at the white women. One little girl, perhaps 5 years old, approached Miriam directly, reaching out to touch her lighter hair. Miriam held very still, letting the child explore the strange texture. The girl giggled and said something in Apache. Despite everything, Miriam found herself smiling. She says it feels like corn silk, Taza translated, and there was something almost like warmth in his voice. The moment was broken by a young warrior who called out something that made Taza stiffen. Other young men laughed, and the tone was unmistakably crude, even without translation. What are they saying? Ruth demanded. Taza's face was stone. They make jokes about wedding night, about 3 wives. He started to rise, anger flashing in his eyes for the first time, but it was Clara who acted, surprising everyone. She placed her hand on Taza's arm, the first voluntary touch any of them had given him. Don't, she said quietly. That's what they want, to make you fight, to break the peace. He looked down at her hand on his arm, then at her face. After a moment, he settled back down, but his body remained tense. The young warriors seemed disappointed by the lack of reaction and eventually turned their attention elsewhere, as the fire burned lower and families began dispersing to their wiki-ups. Naichi himself approached. He studied the 4 of them, then nodded slowly. First day ends well, he pronounced. Tomorrow, you learn more of our ways. Taza will teach. He looked at each sister in turn. You strong women, this is good. Weak women not survive what comes. With that ominous statement, he departed, leaving them to make their way back to the barn in the darkness. Taza walked slightly ahead, alert to any threat, while the sisters clustered together behind him. Once inside their strange sanctuary, the evening's performance dropped away. Taza immediately retreated to his corner, while the sisters huddled behind their partition. "That was—" Ruth began, then seemed at a loss for words. "Survivable," Clara finished. "We can do this. We can maintain the pretense until we find a way out." But Miriam was thinking of the little girl who had touched her hair, of the way Taza had served them food first, of the pain in his voice when he spoke of his dead wife. The lines between captor and captive, between enemy and protector, were already beginning to blur. As they settled for their second night in the barn, she could hear Taza moving quietly in his corner, arranging something. When she peered around the partition, she saw he had covered the largest gaps in the wall near where they slept, blocking the cold night wind. He noticed her watching and froze, as if caught in some shameful act. "Desert night is cold," he said simply. "You're not used to it." Before she could respond, he had retreated to his corner, wrapping himself in a single blanket despite having given them the majority of the coverings. Miriam lay back down between her sisters, but sleep was elusive. Every small sound made her aware of the man just yards away. His quiet breathing, the occasional shift of position, the way he seemed to be standing guard even in rest. This was their life now. She realized this strange dance of distance and proximity, of performance and truth. And despite everything, despite the forced marriage, the captivity, the impossible situation, she found herself thinking not of escape, but of the sadness in Taza's eyes when he spoke of promises kept to the dead. The second night passed like the first, in wakeful silence, but something had shifted in the space between them, subtle as the wind that no longer reached them through the barn's gaps. They were still captives, still unwilling spouses in an arrangement none had chosen, but they were also 4 human beings, each nursing their own wounds, trying to find a way to survive with dignity in a world that seemed determined to strip it away. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of their fragile coexistence. But tonight, in a barn that belonged to neither world, they had found something like equilibrium. It wasn't peace. Not yet. But perhaps it was the first step toward something none of them could yet imagine: understanding. The second day dawned cooler, with clouds gathering on the horizon promising the possibility of rain. Miriam woke to find Taza already gone from his corner, though his blanket remained neatly folded. Through the barn's gaps, she could see him returning from the desert, carrying something in a cloth bundle. "Where did he go?" Ruth's sharp voice cut through the morning quiet. She stood by the door, having obviously watched his return as well. "Hunting, perhaps," Clara suggested, stretching stiff muscles. "We need food." Yeah. But when Taza entered, his bundle revealed not game but desert plants, some kind of cactus pads with the spines carefully removed, and other vegetation Miriam didn't recognize. He set them down without fanfare and returned to his corner, but not before Miriam caught the exhaustion in his movements. How early had he risen to gather these? "For eating?" Clara asked, examining the plants with her practical eye. Taza nodded. "Nopales. Good food when meat is scarce. Also—" he hesitated, then pointed to some smaller leaves. "These help with pain. Thought maybe you need— sleeping on ground is hard when not used to it." Ruth snorted. "We don't need Apache remedies." But Miriam noticed how Clara discreetly rubbed her lower back, and how her own shoulders ached from the unforgiving earth. "How do you prepare them?" she asked softly. Something flickered in Taza's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or gratitude for the civil question. He moved closer, still maintaining careful distance, and began demonstrating how to clean and slice the cactus pads. "My mother taught this," he said as he worked. "When I was small. Before—" he paused, seeming to reconsider his words. "Long ago." "Before what?" Miriam found herself asking, his hands stilled on the plants. "Before soldiers came to our winter camp, before everything changed." The weight of unspoken tragedy hung in the air. Clara, ever practical, broke the moment. "Show us about these pain leaves. Ruth may be too proud, but I'm not." As Taza explained how to prepare a simple tea from the medicinal plants. Miriam watched his hands, scarred but gentle, moving with practiced precision. When he handed her a portion to try preparing herself, their fingers brushed accidentally. Both pulled back as if burned, and Miriam felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she wasn't sure what she was apologizing for. "No," Taza said quietly, meeting her eyes. "I'm sorry. All of this, is wrong." "Then why?" The question burst from her. "Why agree to it?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally. "Because my uncle speaks truth. Too much blood already. My wife, she died because of hate between our peoples. Soldiers looking for hostile Apache found our peaceful camp instead. She ran. They shot." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "She was carrying our child." The barn fell silent except for the wind picking up outside. Even Ruth seemed affected by the raw pain in his voice. Miriam felt tears prick her eyes and didn't try to hide them. "What was her name?" she asked gently. "Ayana. It means eternal blossom." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "She loved flowers, always finding them even in desert. Said beauty lives everywhere if you look." Without thinking, Miriam reached out, almost touching his hand before catching herself. But he saw the gesture, and something in his expression softened. "You remind," he began, then stopped abruptly. Standing, "I must go. Chief wants me to check horses." After he left, the sisters sat in unusual harmony, each processing what they'd heard. It was Clara who spoke first. "He's not what I expected. He's still our captor," Ruth insisted, but even her voice lacked its usual venom. "Is he?" Miriam challenged quietly. "Or is he as much a prisoner as we are?" Before Ruth could respond, voices rose outside, angry, aggressive. Through the gaps, they could see a group of young warriors confronting Taza near the horse pen. The discussion was in Apache, but the tone was unmistakable. One warrior, taller than the rest with fresh scars on his chest, gestured repeatedly toward the barn. "What are they saying?" Clara moved to see better. They couldn't understand the words, but Taza's body language spoke volumes, defensive but not aggressive, trying to calm the situation. The scarred warrior suddenly shoved him, and Taza stumbled but didn't retaliate. "Why isn't he fighting back?" Ruth sounded almost offended by his passivity. The confrontation escalated, with more shoving and what were clearly insults. Then the scarred warrior said something that made Taza's whole body go rigid. For a moment, violence hung in the air like lightning about to strike. Then Taza simply turned and walked away, leaving the young warriors calling after him. He entered the barn with carefully controlled movements, but Miriam could see the tension thrumming through him. "What was that about?" Clara demanded. Taza moved to his corner, hands clenched. "Nothing important. Those men wanted something." Ruth pressed. "What?" He was silent so long they thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "They say I shame Apache manhood. Say real warrior would have claimed wives by now, especially the young one." His eyes flickered to Miriam, then away. "Navarro, the one with scars. He says if I am too weak, he will show proper way." Ice ran through Miriam's veins. "What did you tell him?" "That chief's word protects you. That anyone who touches you answers to Naichi." His jaw tightened. "But young men don't always listen to old chiefs. So we're not safe," Clara stated flatly. "You safe while I breathe," Taza said with quiet intensity. "This I promise." "Why?" Ruth challenged. "Why protect us? We mean nothing to you." Taza looked at her directly then. "You wrong. You mean peace. You mean maybe no more women die for nothing. No more children grow without fathers. You mean everything." The passionate declaration seemed to surprise him as much as them. He turned away, busying himself with preparing the nopales for cooking. But something had shifted in the barn's close air. As the day progressed, Miriam found herself drawn into conversation with Taza despite her sister's disapproving looks. He spoke hesitantly at first, as if words were precious things not to be wasted. But gradually, stories emerged. His childhood learning to hunt, his grandmother's tales, the way the desert looked after rain. You speak of beauty, Miriam observed during one quiet moment, like your wife did. She taught me to see it, he admitted. Before her, I saw only survival. She showed me life is more. And after she died, I forgot how to see beauty until... He stopped, looking troubled. Until what? He met her eyes briefly. Nothing. I speak too much. But Miriam thought she understood what he hadn't said, and it both thrilled and terrified her. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Juanita appeared again with the promised Apache clothing. This time, her manner was less hostile, more curious. She spoke at length with Taza, gesturing toward the sisters occasionally. She says storm coming tonight. Taza translated. Says white women clothes will not keep warm. Also says... He paused, looking uncomfortable. What? Clara prompted. She says you have courage. Not many white women would stay calm in enemy camp. She respects this. We're not exactly here by choice, Ruth pointed out. No, Taza agreed. But you could scream, cry, fight everyone. You don't. This shows strength. After Juanita left, the sisters examined the Apache clothing. Soft deerskin dresses decorated with beadwork, leggings, and blankets woven with intricate patterns. They were beautiful in their own way. Nothing like the simple calicos they wore. It would be warmer, Clara mused practically. It would be surrender, Ruth countered. But Miriam was already running her fingers over the beadwork, admiring the skill involved. It's just clothing, she said quietly. It doesn't change who we are inside. That evening, as promised, the storm rolled in. The first drops found every gap in the barn's roof, creating muddy puddles on the dirt floor. The temperature plummeted, and soon all three sisters were shivering in their thin cotton dresses. Taza silently offered his own blankets, but Ruth refused with stubborn pride. As the storm intensified, he began doing something strange, pulling boards from a pile in the corner and propping them strategically to redirect the worst of the leaks away from where the sisters huddled. You don't have to, Miriam began. Yes, he said simply. I do. Lightning illuminated his face briefly, and she saw not their captor but simply a man trying to create shelter in a storm. When a particularly fierce gust threatened to tear away one of his improvised shields, she found herself jumping up to help hold it in place. They stood there together, both gripping the board against the wind, rain soaking through the gaps. Their eyes met in another flash of lightning, and Miriam felt something electric pass between them that had nothing to do with the storm. Miriam! Ruth's sharp voice broke the moment. Get back here! But as Miriam returned to her sisters, she carried with her the memory of Taza's eyes in the lightning, deep and dark, and holding something that looked dangerously like hope. The storm raged on, and despite their best efforts, water found its way everywhere. Finally, practicality won over pride. Clara was the first to reach for the Apache clothing. I'm not dying of lung fever to make a point, she declared, stripping off her soaked dress with practical efficiency. After a moment's hesitation, Miriam followed suit. The deerskin was soft against her skin, surprisingly warm even when damp. Only Ruth held out, shivering violently but refusing to yield. Ruth, Taza said quietly from his corner. Pride is good, but dead from cold helps no one. Don't you lecture me about, Ruth began, but her words were cut off by violent shivering. Without warning, Taza stood and crossed to her, holding out his own dry blanket, the last one he had. Take, he said simply. I have survived worse storms. Something in Ruth broke then. Maybe it was the cold, maybe the simple kindness, but tears began rolling down her cheeks. I hate this, she whispered. I hate all of this. I know, Taza said gently. Hate is easier than hope. I hated long time too. Ruth took the blanket with shaking hands, wrapping it around herself. In that moment, she looked less like the fierce protector and more like the frightened young woman she truly was. As the storm began to pass, leaving only dripping aftermath, the four of them found themselves sitting closer together than ever before, sharing what warmth they could. Taza had returned to his corner, but the distance felt less like a chasm now. Tell us more about Ayana. Miriam found herself asking, what was she like? Taza was quiet, and she feared she'd overstepped. Then he began to speak, his voice soft with memory. She laughed at everything, found joy in smallest things. When we married, she said we would have many children, teach them both Apache and Mexican ways. She spoke 3 languages, wanted to learn more. His voice caught slightly. She would have liked you. You ask questions like she did. Want to understand, not just judge. How did you meet? Clara asked, drawn into the story despite herself. Trading post. She was translating for Mexican merchants. I came to trade horses. She told the Mexicans I was asking twice what I really said. When I confronted her, she laughed and said anyone who brought such fine horses deserved better price. A smile ghosted across his face. I was angry at first. Then I realized she was right. We married 2 moons later. That's actually romantic, Miriam said softly. Apache can be romantic too, Taza said with a gentle humor. We are people, not just warriors. Even Ruth seemed affected by the story. How long were you married? 3 years. 3 good years. His voice dropped. Not enough. Never enough. They sat in companionable silence then, listening to the last of the rain drip through the roof. Despite everything, the forced marriage, the captivity, the impossible situation, something like understanding had begun to bloom in the space between them. Taza, Miriam said suddenly, surprising herself. What you started to say earlier, about seeing beauty again. You can tell us. He looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him wrestling with something. Finally, first night here, you cried in your sleep, soft, trying not to wake sisters. I thought here's another woman who knows real pain but tries to protect others from it, like Ayana did. He paused, seeming to gather courage. Then morning came, and sun through your hair was like corn silk in light, and you asked about plants instead of cursing me. And I think, maybe beauty didn't die, maybe it just hid for a while. The words hung in the air like suspended raindrops. Ruth made a sound of protest. Clara shifted uncomfortably, but Miriam felt something crack open inside her chest, some wall she'd built after her own heartbreak began to crumble. I should not say such things, Taza said quickly, retreating. I'm sorry. Storm makes me speak foolish. No, Miriam said softly. Not foolish, just unexpected. He met her eyes once more, and what passed between them needed no words. It was understanding, recognition of shared pain, and yes, perhaps the first dangerous spark of something more. The storm had passed, leaving the desert washed clean. As they settled for sleep, closer together now, the Apache clothing warm against night's chill, Miriam found herself thinking about beauty hiding rather than dying. About how sometimes it took another broken soul to help you remember how to see it, in his corner. Taza sat awake, keeping watch as always. But when Miriam peered through the darkness, she thought she saw something different in his posture. Less defeat, more determination, as if he too had remembered something important in the storm's passing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Navarro and his friends would not give up easily. The chief would expect more public displays of their marriage. The world outside still waited with its prejudices and violence. But tonight, in a leaking barn with rain-washed air flowing through the gaps, 4 wounded souls had found something unexpected. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of healing. And in this harsh land where beauty had to be fought for and protected, possibility was its own form of hope. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Chief Naichi arrived at the barn, his weathered face grave. 2 warriors flanked him, their expressions unreadable. Taza rose immediately, and something in his posture made the sisters draw together instinctively. The chief surveyed the scene, the Apache clothing 2 of the sisters now wore, the way they had arranged themselves in the barn, the careful distance still maintained between Taza and the women. His ancient eyes missed nothing. 4 days pass, he said in his measured English. Camp watches. Some say marriage is real. Others, he glanced meaningfully at his warriors. Others say it is pretense, that Taza makes fool of Apache law. Uncle, Taza began, but Naichi raised a hand for silence. Navarro speaks loudest, says you disgrace warrior tradition, says if you cannot be husband, another should try. The chief's eyes hardened. This makes trouble I did not seek. Clara stepped forward, her practical mind already calculating. What do you want from us? Want? Naichi smiled thinly. I want peace, but young men want proof. Want to see that white women can truly be Apache wives, not just, he searched for words. Decorations in barn. We've done everything asked. Ruth protested, gesturing to their clothing. We wear your garments, eat your food, sit at your fires. But do you accept? The chief interrupted. Do you see Taza as husband, or only as guard? The question hung heavy in the morning air. Miriam found herself speaking before she could think better of it. He has shown us nothing but kindness and respect. Naichi's sharp eyes fixed on her. Kindness is not marriage. Respect is not union. He turned to Taza. Tonight, full moon ceremony. All camp gathers. You will show proper claiming, or I cannot hold back those who challenge. Taza's face went carefully blank. What does Uncle mean by proper claiming? The chief's expression was unyielding. You know our ways. Public acknowledgement. Clear signs that wives accept husband. He paused meaningfully. Or Navarro's challenge stands, and old laws apply. After the chief departed, leaving that ominous threat hanging, Taza slumped against the barn wall. For the first time since they'd met him, he looked defeated. What did he mean? Miriam asked quietly. What are the old laws? Taza's voice was hollow. If warrior's marriage is proven false, any who challenge can claim wives instead. By force if needed. He met their eyes with despair. I cannot let that happen, but I cannot force you either. So we're trapped, Ruth said bitterly. Pretend to accept you or face worse. There must be another way. Clara insisted, her logical mind working. What exactly constitutes proof in your culture? Taza considered carefully. Public signs of acceptance, sitting close at ceremony, allowing touch without fighting, speaking words of acknowledgement. He paused, color rising in his bronzed cheeks. And wives must show they sleep near husband willingly, not forced apart. Sleep near, Miriam repeated slowly. But not? No, Taza said quickly. Apache law says woman's body is her own choice, but closeness must seem possible. They spent the morning in tense discussion, trying to find a solution that would satisfy the chief without compromising too much. It was exhausting, this constant negotiation between survival and dignity. As midday approached, Juanita appeared with food and news. She spoke rapidly to Taza, gesturing animatedly. His expression grew increasingly troubled as she talked. What now? Ruth demanded when the old woman left. Navarro gathers supporters, plans to challenge publicly tonight if we cannot show true marriage. Taza's hands clenched. Juanita says he speaks of taking youngest wife first, as is his right as challenger. Ice flooded Miriam's veins. She'd seen how Navarro looked at her, the hunger in his scarred face. No, she whispered. I will not let it happen, Taza said fiercely. But I need... He struggled with the words. I need you to trust me. Tonight, at ceremony. Trust how? Clara asked suspiciously. Let me sit close. Let me... He swallowed hard. Touch your hands, perhaps your faces. Show camp that you do not fear me, do not reject me. He looked at each of them. I know I have no right to ask, but alternative is worse. And if we do this, Ruth said slowly. What then? How long must this charade continue? Until camp accepts truth of it, until Navarro backs down. Taza met her eyes steadily. Or until you find way to leave that brings no bloodshed. I will not hold you forever. The promise hung between them. He would help them escape eventually. If they helped him protect them now, it was the first real hope they'd had. That afternoon, as they prepared for the evening ceremony, an unexpected tenderness developed between them. Taza showed them how to braid their hair in Apache style, his fingers gentle as he demonstrated on Miriam's long tresses. "Your hands shake," she observed quietly. "I have not touched woman's hair since—" He didn't finish, but she understood. "Since Ayana." "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That this brings back pain." He paused in his braiding. "Not just pain, also remembering that tenderness exists. That is not bad thing." Ruth watched suspiciously as Taza worked, but even she couldn't deny the respectful way he handled the intimate task. When Clara asked him to show her a particular knot, he taught patiently, never taking liberties with the closeness required. "You're not what they told us Apache men would be," Clara observed thoughtfully. "What were you told? Savages, brutes who take what they want." She studied him. "But you're just human." "Disappointing?" Taza asked with dry humor. "Confusing," Clara admitted. As sunset approached, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, the camp began gathering for the full moon ceremony. The sisters could hear drums beginning, voices raised in song, the crackle of a great fire being built. Taza appeared in ceremonial dress, leather shirt decorated with intricate beadwork, eagle feathers in his hair, paint marking his cheeks. He looked every inch the Apache warrior, yet his eyes held the same gentle concern they'd come to know. "You look," Miriam began, then stopped, flustered. "Frightening," he suggested. "Distinguished," she corrected, surprising them both. He showed them what to expect, the order of ceremonies, when to stand or sit, how to show respect for traditions they didn't understand. His careful instruction helped calm their nerves, though tension still thrummed through the barn. "Remember," he said as darkness fell, "I will not do anything you do not permit. If you pull away, I stop, always." "And Navarro?" Ruth asked. "Let me worry about Navarro." They emerged from the barn together, and immediately Miriam felt the weight of every eye in camp. The great fire cast dancing shadows across painted faces, making the gathering seem otherworldly. Chief Naichi sat in the place of honor, his expression inscrutable. Navarro and his supporters occupied one side of the circle, their hostility palpable. The scarred warrior's eyes tracked Miriam with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Taza led them to their designated place, settling cross-legged on blankets spread for them. The arrangement required closeness, the sisters arrayed around him in a semicircle. Near enough to touch, Miriam found herself on his right, acutely aware of every inch between them. The ceremony began with chanting, drums beating rhythms that seemed to echo heartbeats. Elder warriors told stories in Apache, their gestures painting pictures the sisters couldn't understand but could feel. This was ancient tradition, older than memory, and despite everything, Miriam found herself moved by its power. Then came the moment they dreaded. Naichi called out in Apache, and the camp fell silent. He switched to English, his voice carrying clearly, "Taza brings 3 wives to our people. This is unusual but not unknown. Question stands. Do wives accept husband, or is this empty gesture?" Navarro stood immediately. "I say empty. 4 days, and they still keep distance like strangers. No true wife refuses her husband's touch." Murmurs rippled through the gathering. Taza tensed beside Miriam, but his voice remained calm as he responded. "Apache law says woman chooses when to accept touch. My wives are modest. This is good thing, not bad." "Modest or unwilling?" Navarro challenged. "Let them show us. Let youngest one show if she accepts you as husband." All eyes turned to Miriam. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she remembered Taza's promise. He would not do anything she didn't permit. Trusting that, she made her choice. Slowly, deliberately, she placed her hand over Taza's where it rested on his knee. The simple touch sent whispers through the crowd. Emboldened, she shifted closer until her shoulder pressed against his arm. "I accept my husband," she said clearly, though the words felt strange on her tongue. "He has shown me nothing but honor." Taza turned his hand palm up, gently interlacing their fingers. His touch was warm, calloused from work and weapons, but infinitely careful. He lifted their joined hands slightly, showing the camp their united front, not to be outdone. Clara moved to Taza's left side, placing her hand on his shoulder. "A man who shows respect deserves respect," she declared. Even Ruth, stubborn Ruth, recognized the necessity. She moved closer on Miriam's other side, though she couldn't quite bring herself to initiate touch. "We stand with our husband," she said through gritted teeth. But Navarro wasn't satisfied. "Words are easy. Apache wives show affection freely. They do not sit like wooden dolls." The challenge was clear, and Miriam felt Taza's hand tighten slightly on hers. She understood. More was needed. Taking a breath for courage, she turned toward him. "May I?" she whispered, so quiet only he could hear. His eyes widened slightly, but he nodded. Miriam reached up with her free hand, touching his painted cheek gently. The gesture was intimate, widely visible, and unmistakably voluntary. She let her fingers trail down to rest against his jaw, feeling the muscle jump under her touch. The crowd's murmur grew louder. This was clear sign of acceptance, of a wife's willing touch. Taza's eyes never left hers, and what she saw there made her breath catch. Surprise, gratitude, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. "Still not enough," Navarro snarled, but his voice had lost some confidence. "In Apache way. Husband shows possession too, shows he claims what is his." Miriam felt Taza go very still. This was the line he'd sworn not to cross, forcing anything on them. But she also understood the challenge. If he did nothing, Navarro would win. "Trust me," Taza murmured, so soft she almost missed it. Then, moving with deliberate care, he released her hand to cup her face gently between both palms. His touch was feather-light, ready to release at the slightest resistance. Miriam held perfectly still, letting him tilt her face up toward his. Their eyes met and held, and in that moment, the camp, Navarro, everything else faded away. She saw only Taza, the pain he carried, the gentleness he protected, the man underneath the warrior. He leaned closer, and for a heart-stopping moment she thought he would kiss her. Instead, he pressed his forehead against hers in a gesture that was somehow more intimate than any kiss could be. She could feel his breath on her face, could sense the tremor running through him at this closeness. "Thank you," he breathed. The words meant only for her. The camp had gone utterly silent. This was beyond mere show. Everyone could see the genuine emotion between them, the careful tenderness that spoke of true connection rather than forced arrangement. Chief Naichi stood slowly. "I see acceptance," he pronounced. "I see husband who honors wives, wives who trust husband. This is marriage in Apache way, respect and choice together." But Navarro, furious at being denied, made one last desperate play. "Then let him prove it fully. Let him take wives to his blankets tonight. Show us in mourning they are truly claimed." The ugly suggestion sent angry murmurs through even his own supporters. Several elderly women stood, scolding him in rapid Apache. But the damage was done. The challenge hung in the air. It was Ruth who surprised everyone. Standing abruptly, she faced Navarro with blazing eyes. "You speak of honor and tradition, but all I hear is a coward who needs force because no woman would choose him freely." Her voice carried clearly across the fire. "I may be new to Apache ways, but I know this. Taza has shown more honor in 4 days than you have shown in your words tonight." The insult from a white woman, a captive no less, sent Navarro into rage. He started forward, hand moving to his knife. But suddenly Taza was standing, placing himself between Navarro and the sisters. "You want challenge?" Taza's voice was deadly quiet. "Then challenge me, not women under my protection." "Protection?" Navarro sneered. "You cannot even bed them properly." "Because I am not animal," Taza replied steadily. "Because Apache man who forces woman shames only himself. Because strength is not in taking but in earning trust." He stepped closer to Navarro. "You want to fight? We fight, but winner gains nothing but victory. Wives are not prizes to be won." Chief Naichi intervened before violence could erupt. Enough. Moon ceremony is for celebration, not blood. He fixed Navarro with a stern look. You have your answer. Marriage is recognized. Challenge is denied. Navarro backed down, but the venom in his eyes promised this wasn't over. As he stalked away with his supporters, the tension in the camp gradually eased. The ceremony continued, but the sisters barely noticed, too aware of what had just transpired. When they finally returned to the barn well after midnight, exhaustion weighed on them all. But as they settled into their respective spaces, something had fundamentally changed. The careful distance they'd maintained seemed suddenly artificial, even silly. "Taza," Miriam called softly as he moved to his corner. He paused, looking back. "Thank you for keeping your word. For not, I will always keep word," he said simply. "This, I promise." Clara, practical as always, voiced what they were all thinking. "Navarro won't give up. This isn't over." "No," Taza agreed heavily. "But tonight we showed truth, that respect can exist between us. That is beginning." "Beginning of what?" Ruth asked, though her usual hostility was muted. Taza considered carefully. "Maybe beginning of understanding that Apache and White are not so different, that we all just want safety, dignity, chance for happiness." He paused at his corner. Or maybe just beginning of friendship between four people who did not choose to be together but choose to be kind anyway. As he settled into his blankets, still maintaining the distance he'd promised from the start, Miriam found herself thinking about that moment by the fire, his hands gentle on her face, their foreheads pressed together, the way her heart had raced at his closeness. She touched her cheek where his fingers had been. Still feeling their warmth. "Miriam," Ruth whispered in the darkness, "what you did tonight." "I know," Miriam replied softly. "But did you see his eyes, Ruth? He's as trapped as we are, maybe more, because he has to balance our safety with his people's expectations." "He could have taken advantage," Clara observed quietly. "When the camp expected it, when Navarro pushed, he didn't." "No," Miriam agreed. "He didn't." They lay in thoughtful silence, each processing the evening's events. Outside, the full moon bathed the desert in silver light, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, lonely sound that seemed to echo the ache in Miriam's chest. She thought of Taza in his corner, maintaining his respectful distance even after tonight's forced intimacy, thought of how his hands had trembled slightly when he touched her face, thought of a warrior who chose gentleness in a world that rewarded violence. "I don't hate him anymore," Ruth admitted suddenly into the darkness, the confession seeming to surprise her. "God help me, but I don't." It was, Miriam realized, its own kind of beginning. Not love, that was too large, too dangerous to name, but understanding, compassion, and maybe, just maybe, the first fragile foundations of trust. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Navarro would plot, the camp would watch, and they would continue their strange dance of survival. But tonight, something real had passed between them at that fire, a moment of genuine connection that transcended the circumstances forcing them together. As sleep finally claimed her, Miriam's last thought was of Taza's whispered, "Thank you," and how it had sounded less like gratitude and more like prayer. The storm struck without warning 3 days after the ceremony. Desert storms were violent affairs, wind that could strip skin, rain that turned dust to raging floods in minutes. The first crack of thunder woke them all from uneasy sleep. "The roof won't hold," Clara stated, already hearing the old timbers groan under the wind's assault. Taza was on his feet instantly, grabbing blankets and supplies. "We moved to back wall, strongest part, hurry!" They'd barely gathered in the corner when a section of the barn's roof tore away with a sound like screaming wood. Rain poured through the gap, turning the dirt floor to mud in seconds. Lightning illuminated the destruction, half the barn now exposed to the elements. "We need to get out," Ruth shouted over the wind. "No!" Taza caught her arm as she headed for the door. "Flash flood coming. Listen!" They heard it then. A roar that wasn't wind, water rushing down from the hills, carrying everything in its path. The barn shuddered as the flood hit its walls. "Up!" Taza commanded, pointing to the remaining roof beams. "Climb!" But even as Clara tried to obey, a beam cracked and fell, catching her leg. Her scream cut through the storm's fury. She went down hard, leg twisted at an unnatural angle beneath the heavy wood. "Clara!" Both sisters rushed to her, but the beam was too heavy, and more of the roof was collapsing. Taza moved like liquid motion. He braced his shoulder under the beam, muscles straining as he lifted. "Pull her out, now!" Miriam and Ruth grabbed Clara under her arms, dragging her free just as Taza's strength gave out and the beam crashed back down. Clara's face was white with pain, her leg bleeding through torn leather. "Broken," Taza said after quick examination. "We must get somewhere safe." "Where?" Ruth demanded. "The whole barn's coming down." Another section of roof collapsed, and suddenly they were exposed to the full fury of the storm. Rain hit like bullets, wind threatening to tear them apart. Clara cried out as they tried to move her. Without hesitation, Taza scooped Clara into his arms. "Rock shelter, past the horse pen. Follow close." They stumbled through the storm, Taza leading with Clara cradled against his chest. Miriam kept one hand on his shoulder to not lose him in the darkness, while Ruth gripped Miriam's other hand. They moved as one unit, fighting against wind that wanted to scatter them like leaves. The shelter was little more than an overhang in the rocks, but it blocked the worst of the wind. Taza set Clara down gently, immediately examining her leg with careful hands. She whimpered but didn't pull away from his touch. "Bone is broken clean," he announced. "Good for healing, but must set it now." "You know how?" Ruth asked, having to shout over the storm. "Set many bones. Warriors fall from horses, children from cliffs." He looked at Clara seriously. "Will hurt very much, but waiting makes worse." Clara nodded, jaw set. "Do it." Taza positioned himself carefully, gesturing for the sisters to hold Clara steady. "When I pull, bone must go straight. You will want to faint. This is good. Body's mercy." He gave no more warning before acting. The sound Clara made was barely human. And then she went limp. Miriam felt tears on her own cheeks, whether from rain or emotion she couldn't tell. Working quickly while Clara was unconscious, Taza splinted the leg with strips torn from his own shirt and pieces of wood from their meager shelter. His hands were impossibly gentle for their strength, treating Clara with the same care he might show precious glass. "She's so cold," Ruth fretted as Clara began to stir. Without hesitation, Taza pulled off his remaining outer clothing, wrapping it around Clara. This left him in only leather leggings, his bronze skin pebbling with cold, but he showed no discomfort. Clara's eyes fluttered open, focusing on Taza with effort. "Did you carry me through that?" "Was nothing," he said quietly. "Liar," she whispered, attempting a smile. "I'm not exactly light." "Light enough," Taza replied, and something in his simple acceptance made Clara's eyes fill with tears that had nothing to do with pain. The storm raged on, and their shelter, while blocking wind, couldn't stop the cold. Soon they were all shivering violently. Without discussion, they pressed together for warmth, necessity overcoming any lingering boundaries. Taza positioned himself as windbreak, taking the worst of what weather reached them. "You'll freeze," Miriam protested, seeing him shiver. "Have survived worse," he said, but his voice shook slightly. "No." Miriam made a decision born of desperation and something more. She pressed herself against his bare back, wrapping her arms around him to share her warmth. After a shocked moment, he leaned back into her embrace. Ruth, seeing the practical necessity, pressed against Taza's other side while carefully cradling Clara. They formed a knot of shared humanity against the storm's fury, all pretense of propriety lost to survival. "Never thought I'd die hugging an Apache warrior," Ruth said through chattering teeth, attempting humor. "Not dying," Taza said firmly. "Just cold. Tomorrow's sun comes. We laugh about this, if we have lips left to laugh with." Clara managed weakly. As the night wore on, They talked to keep spirits up, and Clara distracted from pain. Stories emerged between shivers, childhood memories, dreams deferred, small joys and large sorrows. The storm had stripped away more than just shelter. It had torn down walls between them. "Tell us about your childhood," Miriam urged, her breath warm against Taza's neck. "Before the wars was good time," he said softly. "My father, great horse trainer, taught me to speak to horses with hands, not whips. Mother knew all plants, all medicines. We traveled between winter and summer camps, following the old ways." "What happened to them?" Clara asked, though pain made her voice thin. "Soldiers came to winter camp, said we harbored raiders. We had only women, children, old ones. Didn't matter." His voice went flat. "I was hunting with Uncle, came back to ashes." "How old were you?" Ruth asked gently. 12 winters. Man enough to want revenge, boy enough to cry at night." He paused. "Uncle kept me from revenge path, said hate would eat me like fire. Took many years to understand." "But you did understand," Miriam said. "That's why you're here, trying for peace instead of war." "Trying," he agreed. "Some days harder than others." The storm began to ease near dawn, though rain still fell steadily. Weak light revealed their shelter had protected them, but barely. The barn was completely destroyed, scattered timber and memories. "My mother's Bible was in there," Ruth said quietly, staring at the wreckage. "We'll look when rain stops," Taza promised. "Sometimes storms give back what they take." Clara tried to shift and gasped in pain. Taza immediately checked her leg, adjusting the splint with careful hands. She watched him work, something unreadable in her eyes. "Why are you so gentle with us?" she asked suddenly. "After everything white people have done to your family?" Taza considered as he worked. Gentleness is choice. Violence is easy. Even child can destroy. But to build, to heal, to protect, this takes strength. He met her eyes. "You are not the soldiers who killed my family. Should I punish you for their sins?" "Most would," Clara said honestly. "Then most are fools," Taza replied simply. As full daylight arrived, the extent of damage became clear. The barn was gone, and with it their meager possessions. But worse, Clara couldn't walk. An infection was a real danger with her injury. "She needs proper medicine," Taza said quietly to Ruth and Miriam. "Apache medicine is good, but this needs white doctors' tools." "The nearest town doctor would shoot you on sight," Ruth said bitterly. "Then I take you close. Wait hidden while you get help. And trust us to come back?" Ruth challenged. Taza looked at her steadily. Yes, that simple word hung between them, heavy with implication. He would trust them with his life, after less than a week together. Ruth looked away first, unable to meet that steady gaze. "The camp will never allow it," Miriam pointed out practically. "Then we don't tell camp." Taza said, "Say we shelter from storm. Clara needs rest. I know hidden paths." It was conspiracy now. The four of them united in secret purpose. As the rain finally stopped and sun broke through clouds, they prepared for a desperate journey. Taza rigged a travois from salvaged barn timber, padding it with every scrap of fabric they could find. When he lifted Clara onto it, she bit back a cry. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "Don't be," she managed. "You're saving my life. Again." They set out as the camp was just stirring, taking advantage of the storm's confusion. Taza led them through arroyos and hidden passes, pulling the travois himself while the sisters took turns supporting Clara's head and giving her water. "How far?" Ruth asked as the sun climbed higher. "Half day to place I know. Rock formation like Eagle's Head. From there, town is close, but I cannot go further." They pressed on through increasing heat. The storm's coolness now just memory. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, fever beginning despite their efforts. Miriam walked beside the travois, holding Clara's hand and murmuring encouragement. "She's burning up," she told Taza quietly. He stopped immediately, examining Clara with worried eyes. From a pouch at his waist, he pulled dried leaves. "Willow bark helps fever, but she needs more." They were running out of time, and they all knew it. Taza increased their pace, pulling the travois with renewed determination. Sweat ran down his back, muscles straining, but he didn't slow. "Let us help pull," Miriam offered. "No. Ground is rough. Need someone who knows how to read it. You keep Clara calm. That helps more." It was past noon when they finally saw the rock formation, a towering red stone that did indeed resemble an eagle's head. Beyond it, perhaps 2 miles distant, lay the town of Cedar Springs. "This is far as I go," Taza said, breathing heavily from exertion. "You take Clara from here." "How will we explain?" Ruth asked. "A woman with a broken leg, Apache-style splint, wearing native clothes. Say bandits. Say you escaped in storm. Say anything but truth." He began transferring Clara carefully to a flat area in the shade. Clara's eyes opened, focusing with effort. "Taza?" "Here," he said gently. She reached out weakly, and he took her hand. "Thank you for everything. If I don't—" "You will," he interrupted firmly. "You strong woman, survive worse than broken bone. Promise me something," Clara said urgently. "If we don't come back, if they keep us, take care of yourself. Don't let guilt eat you." "We're coming back," Ruth said fiercely. "All of us." But Taza was looking at Miriam, and she saw the question in his eyes, the doubt, the fear that this was goodbye. "I swear," she said quietly. "We'll return, even if we have to fight the whole town." He nodded slowly, then surprised them all by pulling out a small leather pouch. "Medicine for Clara. Tell doctor to use with his own," and he hesitated, then pulled something else from his belt. A small carved horse, no bigger than a child's palm. "This was my father's. For luck." He pressed both items into Miriam's hands, their fingers touching longer than necessary. "Hurry," he said roughly, "before fever takes stronger hold." They fashioned a crude stretcher from the travois materials, Ruth and Miriam carrying Clara between them. As they started toward town, Miriam looked back once. Taza stood like a statue by the Eagle Rock, watching them go. The distance between them felt like a chasm. "We're really going back?" Ruth asked quietly as they walked. "You heard Clara," Miriam replied. "We promised. Promises made under duress." "Don't!" Miriam cut her off. "Just don't. You know as well as I do that he could have hurt us a dozen times over. Instead, he protected us, carried Clara through a flood, gave up his clothes to keep her warm. We're going back." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "You care for him?" It wasn't a question. Miriam didn't answer, but her hand tightened on the carved horse. The town's edge loomed before them, representing both salvation and danger. They were 3 women in Apache dress, carrying an injured sister, about to trust their fate to white settlers who might shoot first and ask questions later. But behind them waited a man who had trusted them with his life, who stood alone in the desert believing in their promise. That faith pulled at Miriam like a physical cord, already drawing her back before they'd even entered the town. "Together," Clara whispered from the stretcher, her fever-bright eyes managing to focus on both sisters. "Whatever happens, we stay together." Together, Ruth and Miriam echoed, and they walked into Cedar Springs carrying more than just their wounded sister. They carried the fragile trust of a man who had every reason to expect betrayal, and their own growing certainty that going back wasn't about captivity anymore. It was about choice, and choosing to return to someone who had shown them kindness in an unkind world might be the first real freedom any of them had known. The first person to see them was Mrs. Donnelly, the minister's wife, hanging laundry behind the church. Her scream brought half the town running. Within minutes, Ruth and Miriam found themselves surrounded by armed men, all shouting questions at once. "Apache raid!" someone yelled. "They've taken the Peterson girls! Get those savage clothes off them! Where are the others? How many attacked?" "Stop!" Ruth commanded with all the authority she could muster. "We need the doctor. Our sister is dying. Doctor!" Marcus Webb pushed through the crowd, his medical bag in hand. One look at Clara's pale face, and he began barking orders. Get her to my office, now! The rest of you! Back away!" As they carried Clara into the doctor's house, Miriam heard the rumors already spreading like wildfire. Apache devils. Poor girls. What they must have endured. Marshals forming a posse. Inside the doctor's office, Webb cut away the Apache splint with professional efficiency. "Who set this bone?" "Does it matter?" Ruth deflected. "Matter? This is excellent work. Whoever did it saved her leg." He began preparing his instruments. "I need to reset it properly and clean the wound," but the initial field treatment was remarkably skillful. While he worked on Clara, his wife brought them proper clothes. Simple calico dresses that felt strange after days in soft deerskin. Miriam fingered the Apache dress before setting it aside, remembering Taza's hands braiding her hair. "Now, Doctor," Webb said once Clara was sedated and her leg properly cast, "tell me what really happened, and don't insult my intelligence with tales of bandits. Those are Apache clothes, Apache medicine in that pouch, and Apache splint work." The sisters exchanged glances. How much truth could they tell? "We were taken by Chief Naichi's band," Ruth said carefully. "But we weren't harmed. They wanted us as hostages to prevent bloodshed. And they just let you go?" Webb's skepticism was plain. "The storm damaged their camp. Our sister was injured. They allowed us to seek help." Webb studied them shrewdly. "Allowed. Interesting word choice." He turned to his medicine cabinet. "This Apache medicine, willow bark and something else I don't recognize, quite sophisticated. Your captors seem unusually civilized." Before they could respond, commotion erupted outside. Marshal McKenna had arrived with a dozen armed men. He burst through the door, relief flooding his weathered face. "Thank God you're alive. We've been searching since the storm hit." His expression hardened. "How many Apache? Which direction did they go?" "Marshal," Ruth began, but he cut her off. "Save your strength. Miss Ruth, we'll get the details later. Right now, I need to know where to find these savages." "No!" The word tore from Miriam before she could stop it. Everyone turned to stare. "I mean, they're probably long gone by now. No point risking men's lives." McKenna's eyes narrowed. "Miss Miriam, you seem distressed. Did those animals—" "No," she said firmly. "We were not violated. We were treated with respect." "Respect?" One of the posse members spat. "Apache don't know the meaning of the word." "That's enough." Doctor, Webb intervened. "These young women have been through an ordeal. They need rest, not interrogation." He fixed the marshal with a steady look. "Miss Clara won't be fit to travel for at least a week. I suggest you let them recover before demanding their story." Reluctantly, the posse departed, though Miriam could see they were far from satisfied. McKenna posted 2 men outside for protection, though it felt more like captivity. That night, in the small room above the doctor's office, the 3 sisters huddled together on narrow cots. Clara drifted in and out of fevered sleep while Ruth and Miriam spoke in whispers. "We have to go back," Miriam insisted. "He's waiting." "How? We're under guard. The whole town's watching us." Ruth's frustration was palpable. "And Clara can't travel. Then we wait. We heal. We plan." Miriam clutched the carved horse. "But we go back." Days passed in anxious waiting. The town treated them like fragile celebrities, women who'd survived Apache captivity. Everyone wanted to hear their story, and the sisters became expert at deflection, giving just enough detail to satisfy without revealing the truth. Clara's fever broke on the 3rd day. As she regained strength, her sharp mind turned to their dilemma. "We need allies," she said during one of their whispered conferences. "Someone who might understand." That ally came from an unexpected source. Doctor, Webb's daughter. Sarah, barely 16 but wise beyond her years, had been helping tend Clara. She lingered one evening after bringing supper. "You want to go back?" she said quietly. Not a question. The sisters froze. Sarah continued. "I've watched you, the way you touch those Apache clothes when you think no one's looking, the way you stare out the window toward the desert, the way you speak of your captivity with no fear, only longing. You don't understand, Ruth began. My mother was Mexican. Sarah interrupted. Taken in a raid when she was 12. Lived with the Comanche for 6 years before the army rescued her. She used to cry at night, calling names in Comanche. Said her years with them were the only time she felt truly free. The sisters exchanged stunned looks. Sarah leaned closer. If you need to go back, I'll help. But it has to be soon. The marshal's planning a raid. They've found tracks leading to Chief Naichi's camp. When? Miriam asked urgently. 3 days, maybe 4. They're waiting for army reinforcements. 3 days. Taza had been waiting over a week already. Did he think they'd betrayed him? Was he even still alive? The thought made Miriam's chest tight with panic. Clara can't ride, Ruth pointed out. I can, Clara said firmly. Tie me to a horse if necessary, but I can ride. They planned carefully. Sarah would drug the guards coffee with laudanum. She knew where to find horses. Had a friend who could be trusted to stay quiet. Everything hinged on timing and luck. On the appointed night, clouds covered the moon, a blessing for escape. Sarah's drugs worked perfectly, the guards slumping at their posts. The sisters dressed in their Apache clothing, finding strength in the familiar soft leather. Getting Clara onto a horse was agony for everyone involved, but she bit back her cries. I've come too far to quit now, she gasped. They rode hard through the darkness, following the path they'd memorized. Every shadow could be pursuit, every sound potential disaster. But Miriam felt pulled forward by invisible thread, drawn back to Eagle Rock and the man who waited there. Dawn was breaking when they finally saw the distinctive formation, but the area seemed deserted. No sign of Taza. He's gone, Ruth said heavily. Of course he's gone. It's been 10 days. But Miriam slid from her horse, stumbling to the exact spot where they'd left him. Taza, she called desperately. Taza, we came back. We kept our promise. Nothing but wind answered her. Clara, gray-faced with pain but alert, pointed to the ground. Look, tracks, fresh ones. He's been here recently. Then where? Ruth began, but stopped as a figure emerged from the rocks above them. Taza looked haggard, thinner, with new lines etched around his eyes. But the expression on his face when he saw them transformed him completely. He scrambled down the rocks with reckless speed. You came back, he breathed, stopping just short of them. I waited. Every day. I waited. Of course we came back, Miriam said through tears she hadn't realized were falling. We promised. His eyes moved to Clara, taking in her proper cast and improved color. You are better. This is good. Thanks to you, Clara said softly. Your quick work saved my leg. The town's planning a raid. Ruth interrupted urgently. We have to warn your people. Taza's expression hardened. When? 2 days, maybe less. They're bringing army reinforcements. Without hesitation, Taza began preparing for travel, but he paused, looking at them with wonder. You could have stayed, been safe. Why come back to danger? The sisters looked at each other, and it was Clara who answered. Because sometimes safety isn't worth the price. Because you trusted us when you had no reason to. Because... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Because we're stronger together than apart. All of us, Ruth added firmly. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Miriam stepped closer to Taza, close enough to see the exhaustion in his eyes, the relief, the something more that made her heart race. You waited, she said softly. 10 days. You waited. Would wait forever, he said simply, and the honesty in it took her breath away. The horses need rest, Ruth said practically, though her voice was gentle. And Clara needs tending. Is there somewhere safe? Hidden Canyon, hour's ride. We rest there, then warn camp tonight. He moved to help Clara from her horse, his touch infinitely careful despite his obvious fatigue. As they prepared to leave Eagle Rock, Miriam pulled out the carved horse. This brought us luck, she said, offering it back. Taza closed her fingers around it. Keep it. My father would want you to have it. He paused, then added quietly, I want you to have it. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Then practicality reasserted itself, and they mounted up for the journey to safety. As they rode, Ruth brought her horse alongside Taza's. "I misjudged you," she said stiffly. "I apologize. No apology needed. You protected sisters. This is honorable. You protected us too, even from your own people." Ruth struggled with her next words. "I called you savage. I was wrong. You're more civilized than most men I've known. Not savage, not civilized. Just man trying to do right." He looked at all three sisters. "You teach me something. That trust can grow even in hardest ground." They reached the hidden canyon as full sun painted the rocks gold. It held a small spring, shade, and blessed privacy. As they settled Clara comfortably and tended the horses, a strange peace descended. They were fugitives now, belonging to neither world fully, but they were together, and that seemed to matter more than anything else. "What happens now?" Clara asked as they shared water and dried meat. "Now we warn my people. Save lives if we can." Taza looked troubled. "But after, I do not know. Chief wanted peace through marriage. Town wants you back. No good answer. Then we make our own answer," Miriam said with a sudden conviction. "Somewhere there's a place for people like us, people who don't fit in boxes others make. California," Clara suggested. "Oregon, somewhere far from this hate." "Together?" Taza asked, vulnerability clear in the question. "Together." All three sisters answered in unison. As the sun climbed higher, they rested in their hidden sanctuary, planning for dangers ahead but also daring to dream of possibilities beyond. The forced marriage that had begun as captivity had become something none of them had expected. A bond forged in trust, tested by separation, and chosen in freedom. Whatever came next, the warning to the Apache, the flight from pursuing soldiers, the search for a place to belong, they would face it as they had learned to face everything, together. And in that unity, they found strength greater than any tribe or town could offer. The desert wind sang through the canyon, and for this moment at least, they were exactly where they chose to be. The journey back to the Apache camp took all night. They moved like ghosts through the darkness, Taza leading them along paths invisible to white eyes. Clara rode between Ruth and Miriam, gritting her teeth against pain but never complaining. As dawn approached, they saw smoke rising from the camp's morning fires. Their arrival caused instant commotion. Warriors grabbed weapons. Women pulled children close. But when they recognized Taza with the three sisters, confusion replaced alarm. Chief Naichi emerged from his wickiup, his ancient face unreadable. "You return," he said simply, eyes moving from Taza to the sisters. "This was not expected." "Uncle," Taza spoke urgently in Apache, then switched to English for the sisters' benefit. "Soldiers come. Tomorrow. Maybe sooner. The town prepares war." The chief's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. "How do you know this?" "We told him." Ruth stepped forward. "We went to town for medicine for Clara. We came back to warn you." Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. Navarro pushed through, his scarred face twisted with suspicion. "Lies. They lead soldiers here." If we wanted that," Clara said from her horse, pain giving her voice steel. "Would we have returned to warn you?" Chief Naichi raised his hand for silence. "We will hold council. But first," he looked at the sisters with something like wonder. "White women who return to Apache by choice. This has not happened before." As the camp erupted in preparations, Juanita approached with unexpected gentleness. She helped Clara from her horse, clucking over the cast and pale face. "Brave woman," she said in broken English. "All brave women." They were given a new shelter, a proper wickiup this time, recognition of their changed status. As warriors prepared defenses and families packed for possible flight, the sisters found themselves in an odd position, neither captives nor fully accepted, but something in between. Taza came to them as sun reached its peak. "Chief holds council now. Decides to fight or flee." "What do you think he'll choose?" Miriam asked. "He is tired of running." but also tired of death. Taza looked troubled. Young warriors want fight. Elders want survival. No easy choice. Is there another way? Clara asked from her resting place. Something besides fight or flight? Taza shook his head. Army wants us on reservation. Cage for people who lived free since world began. Chief would rather die. Then we need to change the game. Ruth said suddenly. Make it not about Apache versus Army, but about something else. What else is there? Taza asked. Ruth's mind was clearly working. Justice, law, treaties. She looked at her sisters. What if we testified, told authorities how we were treated here versus in town? They wouldn't listen. Miriam protested. Not to us alone, but Dr. Webb might. Sarah would. There are good people who just don't understand. Ruth was warming to her idea. What if instead of meeting soldiers with weapons, we met them with words, with truth? It was a desperate plan, naive perhaps, but Taza's eyes lit with possibility. Chief might listen to this, wait a fight without blood. The council lasted hours. Voices rose and fell in heated debate while the sisters waited anxiously. Finally, Taza emerged, looking drained but hopeful. Chief agrees to try. Tomorrow, when soldiers come, we meet them in open, no weapons visible. You speak for us. He paused. If it fails, warriors are ready. But Chief gives your plan chance. That night, the camp vibrated with tension. Families prepared to flee at moment's notice, while warriors cleaned weapons they hoped not to use. The sisters sat with Taza outside their wickiup, planning what to say, how to bridge worlds with words. I should speak first. Ruth decided. I was the most hostile. If they see I've changed my mind, we all speak. Clara insisted. Different voices, same message. As darkness fell, Miriam found herself walking with Taza to the edge of camp. The stars were brilliant in the clear desert air, and, for a moment, the coming danger seemed distant. Are you afraid? She asked softly. Yes, he admitted. Not of death, of failing, of seeing more good people die for nothing. She slipped her hand into his, feeling him start at the touch before his fingers intertwined with hers. You won't fail. You've already succeeded. How? You showed us another way to be, showed that enemies can become... She paused, searching for the right word. Become what? His voice was barely a whisper. More than friends, she said, heart racing. Taza, But he turned to her then, moonlight catching the angles of his face. I know, he said simply. Feel same. But is it real or just situation? Does it matter? Miriam asked. Real is what we choose to make real. He lifted their joined hands, studying them in the moonlight, his bronze, hers pale, but fitting together perfectly. In another world, I would court you properly. Bring horses to your father. Prove myself worthy. In another world, I might not have seen you truly. Miriam replied. This world, hard as it is, brought us together. Together, he repeated, then drew her closer. Miriam, if tomorrow goes badly. It won't, she said firmly, then softer. But if it does, I want you to know, these days with you have been the most real of my life. He cupped her face gently, as he had at the ceremony. But this time there was no audience, no performance, just two people finding each other against all odds. When he kissed her, it was soft as desert rain, careful as if she might break. She pressed closer, trying to tell him without words that she was stronger than he knew, that she chose this, chose him. When they parted, both were breathing unsteadily. Tomorrow, Taza said roughly. After we save everyone, we talk about future, yes? Yes, Miriam agreed, though they both knew tomorrow might never come. They returned to find Ruth and Clara deep in conversation with several Apache women who spoke English. The women were sharing their own stories, raids that killed their families, children lost to soldier bullets, the constant fear and flight. Use our words tomorrow, one elder woman said. Tell them we are mothers, daughters, Sisters, not just Apache. Dawn came too soon. Scouts reported dust clouds approaching, at least 30 soldiers plus civilian volunteers. The camp moved with practiced efficiency. Women and children to protected areas while warriors took positions. But in the center of camp, a different preparation occurred. Chief Naichi dressed in his finest ceremonial clothes. The sisters wore their Apache dresses with pride now, understanding they represented bridge between worlds. Taza stood with them, weaponless as promised, but alert to any danger. They waited in the open ground before the camp as the soldiers approached. Marshal McKenna rode at the front beside a cavalry captain whose uniform bore the marks of hard campaigns. The marshal's face went slack with shock seeing the Peterson sisters standing freely with the Apache. "Girls, get away from them," he shouted. "We're here to rescue you." "We don't need rescue," Ruth called back clearly. "We need you to listen." The captain raised his hand, halting his troops. His weathered face showed curiosity now alongside suspicion. "I'm Captain Morrison. Are you speaking under duress?" "We're speaking truth," Clara said, leaning on a walking stick but standing straight. "These people aren't what you think they are." "They're Apache," someone from the civilian group spit. "That's all we need to know." "Then you know nothing." Miriam stepped forward. "I've spent weeks with them. They treated us with more honor and humanity than—" She stopped, seeing a familiar face among the civilians. "Dr. Webb?" The doctor rode forward, Sarah beside him on a smaller horse. "We came to ensure your safety," he said, eyes taking in the scene. "Though it seems you're already safe." "Tell them," Ruth urged. "Tell them how you found Clara's leg. Who said it?" Webb cleared his throat. "The initial treatment was expertly done. Saved the limb, possibly her life." He looked directly at Captain Morrison. "These young women weren't harmed. That much is clear. Stockholm Syndrome," someone muttered. But the captain silenced him with a look. "Let them speak," Morrison ordered. And they did. Ruth spoke of protection and honor. Clara described kindness in captivity. Miriam told of bridges built between enemies. They painted pictures with words. Apache children playing, mothers cooking, warriors who chose mercy over vengeance. "Pretty words," the captain said when they finished. "But these are still hostiles who've raided settlements. After settlements raided them." Chief Naichi spoke for the first time, his English careful but clear. "After soldiers killed women and babies in winter camps, who struck first blow? The past is blood and sorrow on both sides." Taza added, "We try to make different future. These women prove it possible." "Prove?" Morrison's eyes narrowed. "How?" It was Sarah who spoke up unexpectedly. "Because they chose to come back. My mother was captive once. She was rescued. Spent rest of her life mourning the family she lost, her Indian family. These women weren't captives by the end. They were family. Family." Navarro scoffed from where he watched with other young warriors. "White women playing at being Apache. When danger comes, they'll show true colors," as if his words were prophecy. One of the civilian volunteers suddenly raised his rifle. "Enough talk. Only good Apache." The shot cracked across the desert. Time slowed as Miriam saw the rifle swing toward Chief Naiche. Without thought, she threw herself forward, feeling the bullet tear through her shoulder as she knocked the chief aside. Chaos erupted. Warriors appeared with weapons. Soldiers reached for guns. Death hovering on eagle wings. But Taza's voice roared above all. "Hold! Everyone hold!" He caught Miriam as she fell, blood spreading across her dress. His face was anguished, but his voice stayed firm. "See, she risked life for Apache Chief. This is enemy?" "Doctor." Webb was off his horse and running before anyone could stop him. "Let me through, I'm a doctor." The Apache warriors paused, weapons ready but not firing. The soldiers hesitated, caught between orders and confusion. In that moment of balance, Captain Morrison made his choice. "Stand down," he commanded his troops. "Anyone fires without my order, I'll shoot them myself." He dismounted, approaching the huddled group around Miriam. "Doctor, shoulder wound. Clean through. She'll live if we stop the bleeding." Webb worked with swift efficiency while Taza held Miriam steady, his face a mask of controlled fear. "Why?" Chief Naichi asked Miriam, kneeling beside her. "Why save this old man?" "Because," Miriam gasped through pain, "someone has to stop the cycle. Someone has to choose differently." The chief's weathered face transformed. He stood, addressing both groups in a voice that carried absolute authority. "This woman has paid blood price for peace. Apache honor this. Any who break peace now answers to me." Captain Morrison studied the scene, the mixed group tending a wounded white woman who'd taken a bullet for an Apache chief, the warriors standing down despite provocation, the complex tapestry of connection that defied simple categories. "Marshal," he said finally, "it seems the situation here is not what we were led to believe." "Captain, you can't be serious." "I'm very serious." Morrison's voice brooked no argument. "I see no hostiles here. I see American citizens trying to prevent bloodshed." He looked at the sisters. "Ladies, I assume you're here of your own free will?" "Yes," all three said firmly, even Miriam through her pain. "Then I see no reason for military action." He turned to Chief Naichi. "However, the territorial government still expects resolution. Come to camp." The chief offered. "We talk. Find resolution without blood." It was a tremendous risk, but Morrison nodded. As the two groups warily merged, Dr. Webb and Taza worked together to treat Miriam's wound. She drifted in and out of consciousness, but stayed aware enough to feel Taza's hand holding hers, to hear him murmuring in both Apache and English, "Prayers, promises, please. Don't you dare die," he said fiercely. "Not now. Not when we just found each other. Not dying," she managed. "Too stubborn. Ruth taught me." "Damn right," Ruth said, tears streaming down her face. As the doctor finished bandaging, Miriam heard Captain Morrison and Chief Naichi in deep discussion, with Clara translating nuances despite her own pain. Terms like autonomous region and cultural preservation and mutual defense floated through her haze. "They're negotiating a treaty," Ruth whispered in wonder. "A real treaty, not the usual lies." By sunset, something unprecedented had been drafted. Not a surrender or a confinement to reservation, but an agreement recognizing the Apache's right to their traditional lands in exchange for peace and mutual aid. It would need approval from higher authorities. But Morrison had weight, and the story of the Peterson sisters would carry power. As camp settled into cautious celebration, Miriam woke fully to find herself in the wickiup. Taza beside her. His face was haggard but relieved. "You scared me," he said simply. "Scared myself," she admitted. "But I'd do it again." "I know. That is problem. You too brave for your own good." She reached up with her good arm to touch his face. "Learned from you." He caught her hand, pressing it to his cheek. "Miriam, when you are healed, I hope." He struggled with words. "Want to court you properly, both ways, Apache and white. Want to earn right to call you wife in truth, not just ceremony." "Yes," she said immediately. "To everything, yes." Outside, they could hear Ruth organizing something with military precision while Clara mediated disputes with logical calm. The camp buzzed with unprecedented hope. Two peoples finding way forward together. "Your sisters," Taza said with gentle humor. "They will be formidable. Ruth wants to establish school for Apache and white children together. Clara speaks of legal advocacy for tribal rights." "And us?" Miriam asked. "What's our role in this new world?" He smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "We show them it works. That love can grow between peoples. That families can be chosen. That peace is possible." He leaned down to kiss her forehead gently. "We be happy. That is revolutionary enough." Through the wickiup's opening, stars began appearing in the darkening sky. The same stars that had watched over conflict and sorrow now witnessed something rare. Hope taking root in desert soil, watered by courage and sacrifice and trust. The road ahead would be long. There would be those on both sides who rejected peace, who clung to old hates. But tonight, in an Apache camp where soldiers sat beside warriors, where white women wore native dress with pride, where a love born of forced circumstance had become true choice, anything seemed possible. Miriam drifted back to sleep, Taza's hand in hers, dreaming of futures where children played without fear of their heritage, where bridges built of understanding spanned every divide. It was a dream worth fighting for, worth bleeding for, worth living for. The full moon ceremony 3 months later was unlike any the desert had witnessed before. Apache and white settlers gathered together under the vast starlit sky, no longer as enemies, but as witnesses to something extraordinary, a true wedding, chosen freely by all involved. Miriam stood before the great fire wearing a dress that combined both worlds, soft Apache deerskin adorned with her mother's lace collar that Ruth had somehow recovered from the ruins of their old barn. Her shoulder had healed cleanly, leaving only a scar that Taza called her badge of courage. Taza waited for her in traditional Apache ceremonial dress, but with one addition, a silver wedding band that Clara had helped him purchase from a traveling merchant. His face, usually so controlled, showed every emotion as Miriam approached: love, wonder, joy, and lingering disbelief that this moment had truly come. Ruth stood as her witness, no longer the hostile woman who'd first entered the Apache camp, but someone transformed by understanding. She'd thrown herself into building bridges between the communities, establishing a school where Apache and settler children learned side by side. Beside her, Clara leaned on her walking stick. Her leg had healed, but left her with a permanent limp she bore with characteristic practicality. She'd become the unofficial legal advocate for the new treaty, her sharp mind parsing agreements that protected both peoples. Chief Naichi presided over the ceremony, speaking words in Apache that Juanita translated: "Marriage born of force becomes marriage born of choice. This is the way of wisdom, taking what life gives and transforming it through love." Dr. Webb had come from town to give the bride away, a role he'd taken on with gruff affection. "Never thought I'd see the day," he murmured to Miriam as they walked. "But you young folks are building something new out here, something that might actually last." The ceremony blended traditions beautifully, Apache blessings mixed with Christian vows. Taza spoke of finding beauty again after believing it lost forever. Miriam promised to stand with him between two worlds, building bridges with every breath. "In my culture," Taza said, his voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd, "a man brings horses to prove his worth. I have no horses to give, only my hands to work, my heart to love, and my life to share. Is it enough?" "More than enough," Miriam replied, tears streaming down her face. "You gave me something worth more than horses. You gave me the freedom to choose, and I choose you. Today, tomorrow, always." When they kissed, the cheer that went up came from both Apache and white throats. Even Navarro, watching from the edges, nodded grudgingly. He'd found his own path to peace, channeling his warrior spirit into protecting the new settlement from bandits and raiders who threatened the fragile alliance. The celebration lasted long into the night. Apache drums mixed with settler fiddles. Children of both cultures played together while their parents shared food and cautious conversation. It wasn't perfect. Years of mistrust couldn't vanish overnight. But it was a beginning. As dawn approached, Taza and Miriam slipped away to the rebuilt barn that had become their home. It stood on the border between Apache land and settler territory, symbolic of their commitment to bridging worlds. They'd constructed it together, along with help from both communities. Each beam and board a promise of the future they were building. "No regrets?" Taza asked as they stood in the doorway, looking out at the desert painted in soft morning colors. "None," Miriam said firmly. "This is where I belong, where we belong." Inside, the barn was simple but filled with touches from both cultures. Apache blankets, a settler's rocking chair, herbs drying from the rafters, books sharing shelves with traditional crafts. It was a home that defied category, like its inhabitants. "I have wedding gift," Taza said, producing a small wooden box. Inside lay a delicate necklace, turquoise stones set in silver. Apache craftsmanship at its finest. Was my mother's, kept it hidden through all the running, all the fighting, waited for woman worthy to wear it. Miriam touched the stones reverently. It's beautiful, like this life we're building. As Taza fastened the necklace around her throat, his fingers gentle against her skin. They heard horses approaching. Ruth and Clara appeared in the doorway, both grinning. Sorry to intrude on the newlyweds, Ruth said. But we have news. Captain Morrison sent word. The treaty's been approved by the territorial governor. Official recognition of Apache lands and autonomy in exchange for mutual defense agreements. And, Clara added with satisfaction, I've been appointed as official liaison between the communities. Turns out having a lawyer who speaks both Apache and English, understands both cultures, is valuable. This calls for celebration, Taza said. But Ruth shook her head. Later, right now. You two need to be alone. We just wanted you to know what you started here. It's working. It's really working. After the sisters left, Miriam and Taza sat together on their porch, watching the sun climb higher over the desert. In the distance, they could see smoke from both Apache camps and settler homes, no longer signals of war, but of life continuing. Ayana would have been happy, Miriam said softly, knowing the first wife's memory would always be part of their story. To see you building peace instead of walls. She would have loved you. Taza replied, would have said you have warrior's heart and healer's body. They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, hearts full. The desert wind carried the sound of children laughing, Apache and white together, from the school Ruth had established. It carried the scent of bread from the bakery a settler woman and Apache grandmother had opened together. It carried hope on its wings. What now? Miriam asked. We've done the impossible, brought peace to enemies, built love from forced circumstance. What comes next? Taza smiled, pulling her closer. Now we live. We raise children who know both worlds as home. We show others it can be done. We be happy. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Is enough adventure for one lifetime. Yes? Yes, Miriam agreed, though she suspected their adventures were far from over. Building a new world never was easy work. But as the morning light painted their small corner of the desert gold, as the sounds of two communities learning to live as one filled the air, as love that had begun in captivity flourished in freedom, Miriam knew they'd already achieved the impossible. They'd found home not in a place, but in each other. They'd proven that bridges could be built even across the deepest divides. They'd shown that sometimes the greatest rebellions were acts of love, and the most powerful weapons were open hands and willing hearts. The desert stretched endless around them, fierce and beautiful as ever. But it no longer divided, it united, its vastness holding space for all who chose to see beyond fear to possibility. In years to come, their story would be told around both Apache fires and settler hearths. The tale of three sisters who went into captivity and found family, of a warrior who chose gentleness over vengeance, of love that bloomed in the most unlikely ground and grew strong enough to change the world, one heart at a time. But for now, in the quiet morning with her husband beside her and their future spreading bright before them, Miriam simply held tight to this moment of perfect peace. They'd earned it with blood and tears, with courage and trust, with the hardest choice of all, to see enemies as human, and in doing so, to find the humanity in themselves. The barn that had once been their prison was now their palace. The bonds that had once constrained now connected, and love that had been forced had become the greatest freedom of all, the freedom to choose each other, again and again. As long as the desert bloomed and the stars watched over their improbable, impossible, absolutely perfect happy ending. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're experiencing this tale, whether you're listening on your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps even somewhere in the American Southwest where our story took place. Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback helps me know what resonates with you and shapes the stories yet to come. Until next time, happy trails.